Yes, there is. hmm This is going to be one of those videos where it's probably going to, maybe, it's going to trigger a lot of people, or it's going to cause them to have some sort of shock, right? I hope not, though. I usually like to think of myself as a pretty calm person, especially when it comes to such sensitive topics like that. Anyways, yes, there is definitely a battle of the sexes in the United States and around the world. And a lot of people might be wondering, well, gee, Anush, why would you think that? Right? In fact, why would anybody think that? Most people are just minding their own business. They're going to work, they're going to school, they're going to church, or, place of worship if they're choosing or not, right? Maybe they're not believers in God, or they're engaging in whatever sort of activity that they're engaging in, and they rarely have time to think about those things, right? And technically, you're correct. Yes, that is what everybody's doing. Well, the vast majority of people are doing, including myself, you know? So I'm not always thinking about feminist theory or anything like that, women as a whole and whatnot. But I do have to caution against this kind of ignorance, right? Because that assumes that there's no problem, right? That men and women are getting along perfectly fine, just like they were for millennia, right? But it's different. They're not. Men and women are actually more suspicious of one another than they used to be. And there is actually a statistic that showed that women and men right now are dating and marrying less and less, right? And even even when it comes to sexual relations, they're engaging in it less and less. This is particularly more true for men than it is for women. We're actually seeing the rate of promiscuity for women increase many, many times, whereas for men it's actually decreasing. So and we're always taught in society that men are these sexual perverts who can't control their sexual appetites, right? They need to constantly have sex. If it's not with a person, it has to be through porn or like masturbation or something like that, right? So, whereas women are always these angelic beings that don't think about such things, they're more noble, they have a higher character, and so, but that's not true. Anybody is capable of doing evil and sinful acts. This is not a man or woman issue. This is a human issue. Sin exists in the world, and so obviously people are going to be more likely to commit sin because it has come to our awareness. The church calls that sinful nature, but there's no such thing as a sinful nature. I'll talk about that in another video. The point is, though, we commit sin. It's a fact of life. Everybody has sinned so far. There's nobody besides Christ who hasn't sinned. But anyways, we're talking here about the battle of the sexes. So, okay, so we go back to the question, why would I even think that there's a battle of the sexes? It's not like men are on one side, right, and women are on the other side, and they have axes, they have swords, they have shields, and they're doing the whole Spartan thing, right? They're running towards one another and beating each other over the head. That's not how it's happening, right? It's more of an ideological battle, and it's more subtle. And I believe that if we are not going to fix it somehow, then what's going to happen is this ideology will continue to grow, especially among the younger generations, and it will manifest itself in a very ugly way, right? Where literally men and women will be hating one another and despising one another, and choosing to live a reclusive life. Excuse me. So, but that's not happening just yet. But I believe that the seed has already been planted, and we're seeing some of the fruit of that, right? Okay, men and women today are. Let's first of all talk about women, right? So women today are no longer taught on what it means to be feminine, right? So in other words, whenever a woman today, especially particularly if she's a younger woman, that means like 25, 24 under, but certainly this also applies to other women as well, in their minds, right? The only difference is like the rate of visceral reaction that they have. So younger women tend to be more emotional. They tend to be more reactive than older women. But anyways, they tend to wonder, well, what does feminine even mean? Is there such a thing? That's just a classification. There's no such thing as something is masculine and something is feminine. There's no such thing. That's all nonsense. That's all bullock. But in reality, that's not true. The feminine aspect of women is women know what femininity is, right? It includes things such as kindness, gentleness, compassion, right? Those are feminine characteristics. That's very, I would say, if I can be quite honest, that's very rare in today's women. Instead, due to third wave and fourth wave feminism, we have men having those traits. So there are more men who have these stereotypically feminine attributes such as compassion, nurturing, caring, agreeable, right? Or at least men are being forced to be like that because, we are taught that masculinity is toxic. And more on that a little bit later. So women today have become more masculine. So women today are becoming more assertive, right? They are becoming more outspoken. They are becoming more combative, more competitive. And so these are masculine attributes, right? Now, let me be clear. Nobody is only masculine or only feminine. There's no such thing. In fact, anybody who claims to be that is lying, because if there was such a person who's only masculine or only feminine, that person is unhealthy, and they are going to be eliminated from the gene pool so quickly before they even have time to explain to us how they achieved such a way of life, right? So we are a mixture of both. We have both feminine and masculine attributes. Myself included, I have some feminine attributes and I have some masculine attributes. And so, I'm more naturally, as a guy, going to be more masculine because I have higher levels of testosterone, right? So that means not only do I have this hormone inside of me that makes me more aggressive, naturally more physically aggressive, right? Women are emotionally more aggressive, but it's also going to enlarge my bone structure, density, muscle structure and density, my height, so I will be naturally stronger than the average woman. But in today's society, we pretend that's actually not a fact. We pretend that biology is this thing that does not exist, which I'm sorry, it does. Women are, well, okay, where was I talking? Okay, that's right. So, so that's what's happening. So in other words, there has been a switch in the gender dynamics. So now, instead of encouraging men to understand their masculinity and to accept it in order to be more productive members of society, we are teaching them that their masculinity, which is inherent to their nature, that's not something that they can extract from themselves. That's not something that they're also socialized into being masculine. That's just something that they inherit from birth. They are told that it's an evil part of who they are. But masculinity is not evil. It's just a thing, right? Masculinity is simply an attribute. The same thing with femininity. femininity is also not good and it's not bad. It's just a thing. It's just an attribute. But in today's society, what we are taught is that femininity is superior to masculinity, and there's no such thing as toxic femininity, because femininity cannot be toxic, whereas masculinity is always toxic. And so yes, that's true that most men and women today are not constantly thinking about these things because they don't understand it at such a deep level, right? Especially somebody who's younger, like a high school student, a college student. But it is a filter through which they see society, right? So not only themselves, but others around them. And it affects the way they interact with the opposite sex. And so it makes life too simplistic, right? So instead of talking to people, having a broad sample of people, this is something that they teach you in the social sciences. In order for your study to be valid, you have to have a generalizable and adequate sample. So in other words, if I were to try to figure out if men are criminals, I wouldn't just pick 20 men. And let's just say that 10 out of those 20 men are criminals. I can't say, therefore, 50% of men are criminals. That's not how it works, especially if I'm talking about the United States. The United States has about, I think it's like 352 million people. Or I'm sorry, no, it's actually 320. Never mind. Sorry about that. So it has 320 million people, and a slight minority, right, is men. So like I think there are slightly more women, but let's just say that 170 million of Americans are male, right? Biologically male. Not going to get into the whole gender category of gender is a spectrum. It's not a spectrum. I'll talk about that in another video. Gender and sex are very closely related. But anyways, biological males. I cannot generalize based on a sample of 20, right? I cannot say that therefore since 50%, 10 out of the 20 are criminals, therefore like I think it's like 85 million men are definitely going to be criminals. That's not how it works, but that's what we're taught in society. We are looking at a tiny substrata of men who display those toxic masculinity attributes, right? And we generalize and we say, therefore this is what masculinity is about. If even a guy were to even dare to say that about women, he would be lambasted, right? He would be treated harshly and criticized. And so we should always be careful to not generalize, right? We need to have more and more samples, and so men and women cannot judge one another based on a very limited sample. So if you're a guy and you have a one view of women and it's too simplistic, it's not nuanced, you have to talk to more women. Same thing with women. If you have an overly simplistic view of men, especially if it's negative, you have to talk to more men, right? And so I'll continue this topic more in another video. I just kind of wanted to give you a general outline of what I think about this topic. I think it's very fascinating. It's very interesting, you know, especially being like a sociologist. I like to understand these things better and better. So, all right, guys, see you in the next video. Take care.